Hey everybody, welcome to Swamp Up Online 2020. I'm Ravi Lachhman, and today we're going to be talking about continuous delivery, getting to a yes. Now, if there's any sort of questions, please free to add them in the chat. We can keep the conversation pretty interactive. It's just me talking in front of a screen for 30 minutes, so the more questions you have, the better. Happy to answer them. So a little bit about myself. I'm Ravi Lachhman. I'm an evangelist at Harness. I get told no a lot. I'm a professional no-getter. And also in my career, I definitely had a lot of incidents and outages. Thank goodness we live in 2020 and we have a blameless culture because we used to get blamed a lot for a lot of our outages. But kind of background, I've been in distributed systems for a while. I currently work for Harness. We're a continuous delivery as a service company. Previous roles, I worked for AppDynamics, Mesosphere, Red Hat, IBM. So always in the distributed Java space. And now I get to talk to you. And so what are we going to be talking about today? We're going to be talking about getting to a yes. A yes is important, right, in the business world. So how do we get a yes? What is continuous delivery? What is this thing I'm blabbing around about? What is CD? No, it's not a compact disk. It's continuous delivery. An abundance of choice. In the technology world, we have so much choice. There's a lot of opportunity for a no in there. And so understanding how you actually get to a yes will help you navigate that choice. And then with the abundance of choice, I also want to talk about one of the Linux Foundation's organizations called the Continuous Delivery Foundation, or aka the CDF. So the CDF is here to help. So, oh yes, let's talk about what it takes about getting to a yes. So one of the first books I ever had to read in a professional setting, it's so weird, after this is like 15 years ago, like when you come out of university, was actually Roger Fisher's book and William Ury's book called Getting to a Yes, right? So I'm fresh out of school. I was working for a consultant at IBM. And the very first book they say you need to go buy and learn about is Getting to a Yes, right? So it's all about, I was reading the title of the book, it's all about negotiating an agreement without giving in. Like, for example, if we were all on the particular Swamp Up here and we all, let's say, asked a question or asked and asked, there's a lot of negotiation that goes back and forth, which is pretty funny, right? Or a lot of decisions that have to be made. And we'll kind of decompose some of those decisions. Ironically, in software, we think software is really objective. Because the metric A happened, we have to take action A, or because B happened, we have to do C. But a lot of times, even when building a system, when operating a system, when maintaining a system, there's actually a lot of subjective things that come into play, and actually a lot of negotiation. And this one book can really teach us a lot of things. So let's actually walk through a business process really quickly. So I'm not trying to date myself here, but if you remember what it was like to apply for a credit card in the 1990s, it was fairly different than applying for a credit card today. So I remember when I was going into university, right? Like I needed to get my own credit card, and basically what I had to do in the 90s was call American Express. I talked to a CSR, a customer service representative, and he or she would take my information. I would give them prudent information. What do I do? I'm a student. I have negative income. Well, you get the drift. And then they would kind of give you sort of interview. They would pull your credit somewhere, and then you have to wait 2 weeks. And then American Express would send me a piece of mail, snail mail. I open it up, I look at it and say, oh, congratulations, Ravi, you've been approved, or most likely I've been declined, right? And then 2 weeks after that, we get the card in the mail. So I have a card, I have a plastic card, I can go shop, buy some books, buy what students buy. And let's compare that to what happens today. For the this is one of my favorite travel bloggers I read. His name is Ryan Kelly, the points guy. And in the amount of time it took me to explain the Skeletor process here, you could have actually went on your phone and apply for a credit card at Amex and have a card number in your Apple Wallet, right? And so that would have taken 60 seconds, and you have a platinum card ID in your Apple Wallet. Now, comparing what's the difference between Skeletor and what's the difference between my buddy Ryan here, or Brian here, is the decisions were all automated, right? Like everything, the number of decisions that American Express had to go through actually increased by a magnitude, right? So the decision criteria has increased, but they're able to arrive at a decision fairly quickly, and that's all thanks to automation. There wasn't someone reviewing it, there wasn't someone looking at it. But in the system world, it's okay for us to take 4 weeks to decide if a deployment's okay, which is kind of odd, or a release is okay. And so let's start talking about the pillars of getting to a yes, right? So the very first one, you want to separate people from the problem. And that's a very big draw for automation, right? And so here's my manager, Sarah. This is actually fairly recent. I was deploying something that we're deploying a lab environment, but somehow like the Terraform scripts I came up with were not removing all of the resources when we do Terraform destroy. And I was like, "Hey, Sarah, can I go deploy the change?" She's like, "No." I even asked nicely, "Please, Sarah, no." You see what happened there. So one is separating people from the problem. It applies to quoting the book, right? So basically, it applies to the interaction between two parties in negotiation. So here are Sarah and I negotiating, and there's no negotiation. This got shot down. Like no, no, no. But also, there can be three kinds of subcategories. There's perception, emotion, and communication. Sarah's perception of me asking for this is like, well, it doesn't work. Why are you asking? And the emotion there is like, hey, if there's an outage or there's an overage, like, hey, we're ultimately responsible for that bill. And then communication, I maybe could have done a better job saying, hey, Sarah, that we can get the change in. I can work after the fact to make sure our old resources are removed. But that's it, right? Hey, because as people, we're all transcribing those three things at the same time. You have different values, you have different cultural backgrounds. And if there's pure automation was in place there, ironically, Terraform is automation, we could have gotten rid of that problem, right? The next one is focus on interest, not the position. So here's AppSec Squirrel here. So I summoned the power of AppSec gods to review the Stone Archive rules. And so when you have a lot of specialists, right? Like I came into this problem a lot with AppSec. Also came into this problem basically around security engineering and infrastructure engineering as a developer. A lot of the vertical expertise that's there, if you had to go, let's say, and run an AppSec scan after the fact, or enable or interact with a subject matter expert, this is usually it, right? What ends up happening, that person, for better or for worse, they're kind of matrix. They're so focused on that particular position, like, hey, I'm an AppSec engineer. If anything slips through the radar, it's my head that gets chopped. But really, that's it, right? Like, hey, we all have interests that led us to the position. The understanding that the AppSec engineer is trying to protect the application and protect the business. The same thing, I have those inherent interests too as a software engineer, but might not be my vertical expertise. So really focus on the interest that, hey, we're doing this for the good of the company. Here, it's funny, I actually have a Sonar Cube scan as part of my continuous delivery pipeline. So you see what we're getting at here, right? The more you can put into a pipeline, the better it is for you. And also, one of the hardest things to do is actually insisting on objective criteria. So what does this mean? This little baby here is reality, subjective or objective. But when dealing with systems, it's always important for us to get metrics, to get data, right? Like as ironic as my first statement was, a lot of times in systems, it's also as subjective as it is objective, right? But if we're looking at per the book, right? Hey, both people making a deal should be based on practical criteria or practical data. A lot of this comes into play if you're rolling back something, right, in your pipeline. When do you actually roll back if something was erroring out? Clearly, you want to look at your MTTR, your restore metrics. But if you're making that on like look and feel without having objective metrics, that would actually be a problem. So always want to know what both parties' intentions are. Hey, clearly, like, both parties might be aligned at this point. We want the application to be performant. We want to make sure that we roll back only at a certain time versus, I used to work for an investment bank, keeping an open mind against pressure and threats. Like my bonus, I was incentivized to make sure that our features got into production. And sometimes our rollback criteria were more subjective, like, let me try to smooth something over. But getting a yes, always people favor objective stuff over subjective stuff. So let's talk a little bit about continuous delivery now from our Ewok friend over here. So what is continuous delivery? And so one thing I like to talk about is the lifeblood of an application. So imagine this donut as your application. So the lifeblood of your application is the application itself, but also there are pillars that are supporting the application. These four pillars here could be underlying compute, underlying storage, underlying networking, and underlying application infrastructure. Without these four elements or hubrises of an application, your application wouldn't do anything. Like if you don't have anywhere to get to it, no networking, it's your application. If your application is not installed for storage, Is it really an application or is this in memory? And so basically, when you're deploying something, delivering something, you're making a change to one of these. Actually, if you count the donut, one of these 5 pieces, that you're adding a feature, or you're changing the app infrastructure, or you're changing the underlying infrastructure. And all of this requires changes, right? All this requires decisioning. You have to negotiate. Do you need more? Do you need less? Why are you doing certain things? There's so many decision criteria that you have that a very good place to put this is actually a continuous delivery pipeline. So when we're building, some sort of contract or some sort of pipeline, I like to break a delivery pipeline into a couple pieces, right? So getting to a yes, we always want to show it outside the book now. Like we want to show incremental success. And so I always like to talk about a tightening the screw or tightening the rope type of model that, you want to make sure that the both radio dials of innovation and business controls are there. So as you go from developer to your quality assurance environment to even the production environment, you want to make sure that you have some freedoms. Also, you can justify those freedoms. So we're looking at a typical pipeline. Usually you have 3 sets of rule sets, but with 3 different types of tests. In development environment, you might be running static code analysis, you're running unit tests, you're running integration tests, things that are proof to the feature. As you kind of get into other environments, like now you're taking the focus off of the feature and into the environment, right? So you're doing a smoke or soak test. Are you running regression tests back on the platform that you're running? This is where more environmental type concerns like perf tests and security tests are to come in. And again, you're starting to increase the rule set. And also, again, you're building incremental confidence. And finally, when you go to production, you're doing some sort of, let's say, safe release mechanism like a canary verification, which I'll talk about in a second here. Also taking in full to full end-to-end visibility, you're running perf tests again, you're running the more environmental production phase security tests. And that's where it really gets to the customer. And so one of the, I would say, pillars of continuous delivery is actually canary deployment. So here I'm using a canary and chunky otter here that I like to use. And the users are these tacos here. But basically what a canary deployment is, if you're unfamiliar, it goes harkening back to the day of a canary in a coal mine. You do a very small release. This goes back to incremental confidence, right? You're more likely to get a yes if you have objective measure and also your interests are aligned, right? So the interest would be the application's running and the objective measure is performance data or availability data. And so by using a canary deployment, the yes would be promoting the canary on top of the stable chunky otter to all canaries. So canary might be version 1, chunky otter might be version 1. Canary is 1.1, chunky otter is 1, and then you slowly switch over, right? So you, by the magic of load balancing, your users are building incremental success. And this is a pillar of continuous delivery. A lot of continuous delivery deployments leverage a canary deployment. Again, it's a safety mechanism. Depending on the application, your application might be able to do this or might not be able to do this. But why is there such an investment in continuous delivery? Why is there such an investment? I'm going to be using more memes here. We have stonks and not stonks. Eventually, everybody moves on, right? Like a lot of the decision criteria, I'll give you some anecdotal information. Like I must have been on a dozen teams so far in my career. And every single one of my teams I've ever been on, we deploy software differently. We might build it the same, right? We design patterns or design patterns, design paradigms or design paradigms. But when it gets to the time for us to actually do the deployment, a lot of times we're just leveraging scripts, right? And so there's good times and bad times, but most people will move on in their career. So having some sort of defined process, like putting it all out there, if you do exactly what you're subject to, you're more likely to go for a yes, right? Because you know the rule set you're subject to, the exact deployment pipeline you're subject to, and now you regardless of people moving in and out, you definitely know what's expected of you. This all has to do with confidence. Are you confident of the change you're going to make? So if you're familiar with any sort of DevOps monikers, you'll always hear this chant: people, process, and technology. And so with people, process, and technology, I always like to say this: technology and process are easy to get confidence in, right? So in technology, for example, you might say, I have a 5-node cluster. So you can take 2 concurrent failures. So like I can take 2 failures. I still have 1 to 3 nodes up and running in that particular case, and I'm able to handle the traffic. So my technology is confident. Process-wise, absolutely. We have a change control board. We have several people who have to say yes. So we're confident that when everyone says yes, the process is secure and confident building. But always the hardest one to build confidence in here is the people, right? Like, we're going back to, we're emotional. We certainly have our core values that we have. We're a sum total of our experiences, and just making sure that, hey, like, does this work? Does this not work? It's really difficult, right? And this is usually where the no's start to step in. It's one thing if the process tells you no, it's another thing if people tell you no versus technology. And that's a lot what we're going to talk about when we're going to start dissecting you know. And if you're able to build a particular continuous delivery pipeline, you might be able to get a yes. And so the switching gears a little bit, there is so much choice out there in terms of technology. This is why people come to conferences like this, right? You want to learn about new technology. You want to learn about what's hot in technology. You want to learn what the paradigms are being shifted. As a well-educated engineer or practitioner, you really want to know what's going on. But one of the things I like to talk about is cloud native. So there's two terms here: idempotency plus ephemerality. I actually can't say the word. It's funny. I only speak one language, it's English. And these are actually two new words I had to learn a few years ago, even though I can't pronounce them clearly. It's always weird when you're like an adult and you see new words like, can you get that in a definition or a sentence? And you're not in a spelling bee. But basically what idempotency and ephemerality mean is that items are something to be idempotent. It means it's a mathematical term. So 2 plus 2 always equals 2, right? Or x plus x always equals y. So no matter how many times you hit an equation, the output, once the inputs are the same, will not change. Like, for example, in system technology, if I keep asking, like the weather outside, I'm in Atlanta, so it's sunny and hot outside. Like if it's hot, no matter who I ask in the weather service, I'm going to get it's hot back. And ephemerality means that things are short-lived. So your ephemeral instances, things are very short-lived. So the paradigm of something has to be consistent and also it can die at any time gives you cloud native, which is interesting. You might say, you know what, there's not that much technology out there that can do both, because both of these terms are pitted against each other, which I would tell to you, if it was 5 years ago, you'd be absolutely right. But fast forward to today, here's a little thing from the CNCF, the Cloud Native Compute Foundation. Every month, this is their CNCF landscape. There's just more cards. So each one of these are projects or cloud native projects that are supporting this type of equation. I remember in San Diego around Christmas time, the number was 1,100. So from December to June, there was another 300 projects that were added. Crazy amount of momentum. Now, what this ends up happening is that we're going to start seeing that since there's so much choice, you might be telling yourself, well, I actually want to go about and use some of this really cool technology. This technology is getting more and more granular, and you might say, you know what, this really solves a specific problem in our technology stack or solves a specific business problem for us. We want to include that in the technology stack. But let's walk through the decision process where the no's lie, right? And so where I call this little exercise, where is no? And so let's say you have this idea. This is kind of typical, right? Like I've been through this exercise many times doing kind of like technical needs and feeds and speeds and validation. But you might say, you know what, I found this really cool technology, Istio or Traffic. I need a service mesh. I was picking on them because they're hot technologies now. But I really need this cool technology right now. And the first question might be, are you an expert? No, I haven't used it. There's your no. Or is this operational? Do we have operational expertise on the team or in the organization to run this particular package? And a lot of times when it's new technology or changing the paradigm, the answer is no. And how do you go about doing that? If you want to become an expert, you better go ahead and get that O'Reilly subscription. So those funny colored animals like ferreting, like a ferret or some sort of animal, an Istio in action. That might be from Manning Press. But you really have to like build expertise, not only by doing this type of discovery, but you're also needing to build a good amount of expertise. And let's focus on that operational part right there. So a little more of that no, right? So the most no's came from is something operational. So a little more on the no is something operational. And a lot of times you would get that question. That'd be kind of frustrating, right? Like, hey, the main part about it is if someone asks you, hey, is that technology, can we operate it? Can we maintain it? A lot of times we're focusing on the operational portion of it. Do you know how to do certain management tasks? Can you upgrade in place? Sure. Not sure how to do that. Or also you're getting a bigger O'Reilly book, right? So usually if you're looking at technology for maintenance type of things, they'll give you instructions like, hey, this is how you go from version to version. These are upgrade instructions. These are even potentially downgrade instructions. These are recovery instructions. But it all kind of hinges on, well, do you know how to deploy it, right? So if you need to do some sort of maintenance task, like what exactly are you doing here? Can you give me confidence? Let's say pretend I'm in a decision making position, but do I know the way to deploy? And usually it's an iffy question, like, oh yeah, there's APIs we can use, but when it comes down to it, like, no, how are we going to deploy in our organization? We know we can't directly hit those APIs. We turn them off for security reasons, and we have to go through some sort of facade or a pipeline. And this is where we get to the continuous delivery foundation. A big portion of answering these type of questions is actually the purpose of continuous delivery and the continuous delivery foundation. So wrap everything in a pipeline. It will benefit everybody. So a little bit of representing about the continuous delivery foundation. Here's a very meta. I'm giving this particular talk later about how much should you deploy, right? So usually this is a presentation in a presentation slide here, but the purpose of the continuous delivery foundation is that really educating people on the benefits and also the tooling around continuous delivery, right? So there's a lot of there's a big increase in number of vendors, a big increase in number of practices, but really helping answer some very basic questions. Here I have, if you were just starting out in the technology world, you might Google like, well, how many times does Amazon deploy? And I call it the fear of being FOMO, fear of missing out. If your organization is not deploying as much as Amazon or whatever lean enterprise told you, you're not any good. Clearly you're highly skilled and you're very good, but you're dealing with the cards that was dealt to you. This is where you can learn so much about the tooling, right? And so also it's a neutral, like the CNCF landscape, the Continuous Delivery Foundation. We also have a landscape that's a teeny bit smaller than the CNCF landscape. But really, this is where you can come learn about different types of tools, right? I work for Harness, I'm a vendor, but there's also several projects on there you can learn from. Let it be Jenkins X, Spinnaker. There's lots of other organizations that participate because we have a common goal of helping you get to a yes, or even inversely to talk or help you get to a no a lot quicker, so you can learn how to get to the yes. But that's all I had to say today. I know we have a few minutes open for questions, so if there's any sort of questions, I'm happy to get in the chat, open them. Thank you so much, everybody, for your time. Really excited to talk at Swamp Up, and hopefully the chat was informative.